Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. My next guest, Dominic Longo, is an executive coach, facilitator of transformation, and leadership development expert. I came across his work as the founder and managing director of Flourishing Gaze, which offers executive coaching and leadership development from the LGBTQ+ perspective. Dominic personally identifies as a leader, as a gay man, and as an Italian American. The core of his work is the Hero's Journey program, which offers a peer community and coaching program for highly accomplished gay, bisexual, queer, and trans men who are ready to own their superpowers and move into holistic thriving and flourishing. I get such a charge out of seeing and knowing gay men who hold space for other men to thrive, so I immediately knew I wanted to have him join our conversation. Now, even if you aren't a queer man, this conversation is for you. I encourage you to keep listening with the lens of what is gained from hearing a differing or new perspective. There's a lot more to learn about this man, so let's get him into the conversation and hear what he's all about. Welcome to the New Masculine, Dominic.
Thanks, Travis. Delighted to be here.
It's so wonderful to have you. Is there anything else that we should know about you before we jump into the meat of this conversation?
No, I think those are some good entry points. Yeah, I put, you asked about my ways of identifying, especially, the masculine parts of me, and Italian American seemed especially pertinent. And I don't always introduce myself that way, but I guess I would underline that seems especially relevant for this conversation.
And why does it feel relevant for this conversation?
Well, as I reflected on masculinities, I guess the kind of working understanding that I have is that it's something about molds, societal molds or cultural molds that are built around male bodies. And I'm both an American. I grew up in Nebraska, in the late 20th century, and now living in New York City. And although I have other ethnicities, my dad's side of the family is Italian from Sicily, and so that those cultural aspects just heavily influence, I think, what, as well as a historical, which kind of everyone alive, right now is in a way sharing, but the societal and cultural parts really shape gender, including masculine ways of showing up in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm really curious to find out more about how your cultural upbringing has shaped the way that you view masculinity. So let's kick it off by finding out, what are some of the stories that come to mind for you when you think about what you learned it was to be a man growing up as a little boy?
Yeah. Well, as you asked that question, I want to recognize that, at least from my way of seeing, most of what gender is, most of what our masculinity is, the way I, acted out in the world, I don't think we see. I don't think we have access to. I think it's unseen so much of the time. So, yes, I have some stories that I'm happy to share, but I also recognize that so much is like behind the curtain, and we're so subject to it. We are not able to see it. because we're seeing through it. You know what I mean? But one story I actually recently wrote about my grandfather, Longo, my Sicilian grandfather, standing in front of the mirror, preening in the morning, kind of for hours, it always seemed, and he would stand there naked and kind of getting every hair in place, or, removing hairs in certain places, and had all of these kind of products kind of the 1950s or 1960s that, like, I don't know, the breen, was it breen? The sort of, kind of blue liquid that he would soak his combs in. And then he had like, the sort of green aftershave, whose name is escaping me right now. Like all of these potions and so on. And he would finally kind of make his way downstairs. And my grandmother would say, "There he is, Beau Brummel." And he would make this self-deprecating joke about himself. He dressed in a suit every day to go to work as a physician, and he would say, "Yep, here I am, the high-class pimp," and there's something about his, performance of a kind of manhood that I noted that seemed different from maybe other, more white men in my world, in the suburbs of Omaha. That, what is the import of that? I don't know exactly, but I can tell you that it's powerful and it's important on me. I'm not a preener myself. I'm lucky if I look at the mirror kind of on the way out the door. But yeah, there's something about really attending to appearance and to the body, and even prettifying. I mean, he was a very, in the way, straight, although sensual man. Yeah, it's just a story that does feel potent for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it does feel different to me also than what I grew up with, or what many men I hear tell the story about. There's actually oftentimes, until maybe like the late 90s, early 2000s, when the metrosexual thing came aboard, like there's actually very little put into pruning and making ourselves look nice and our physical appearance in that way. And I think that has changed over time, and I think that there are ways in which our like body images have changed for men, and our ideals around what men need to look like and how they need to care for themselves. But that is interesting that you had that even at such a young age. You were seeing that kind of man that was really interested in perfecting the physical appearance portion.
Yes. So I'm glad you said metrosexual, because I would never have thought about that in regards to my grandfather, who was born in like 1913. But yeah, there's something along those lines. I mean, that does sort of fit. Yeah,
he was ahead of his time. Trendsetter over here. What other stories come to your mind when you think about how you were shaped as a boy to become a man in this world?
Yeah, just without reflecting too hard, I guess sports come to mind. Just for me, it was soccer. That was the main sport from the time I was about 5 years old. Playing in a league with other boys. I grew up in a very Catholic milieu, like Catholic schools. And so the Catholic schools soccer league, and, the boys had their teams and the girls had their teams. And the coaches were always somebody's dads, and, among other things, I mean, those same dads were our Cub Scout leaders, wearing a different kind of uniform and doing a different kind of ritual that had a very different gendering than Girl Scouts, which my sister was in. And again, these are the kinds of things that, like, we didn't look at. We just looked, of course, it's the most natural thing in the world that scouting should be gendered, or soccer, for, 8-year-olds or whatever. What is the import of that? What is the influence or impact on me as a man of those sort of gender tracks that I was so, put into, and yet presented as if they were the most natural thing? I don't know exactly, but it seems, again, potent.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're bringing these kind of concepts up, because I think so much of what we teach children is absorbed just because that's what's normal. It's not like we're pointing out this always necessarily like you have to do this or you can't do this as a boy. But there are so many places where there are things that are unspoken that are just part of the experience that we funnel children into, that shapes the way they see themselves, the way they see people of other genders, the way they see their relationship to what is possible for them and what's possible for others. And so I think there's something really important that it's not always necessarily explicitly taught, but there's so much of the ways that we're raised in and the experiences that we go through that do tell us what is possible and what isn't possible for us.
Yes.
You mentioned also being raised in the Catholic Church. Has that had any shaping of you in terms of what it is to be a man? Like, do you see that as an important way that you learned about masculinity or manhood?
Yes, and everything else. I mean, I really was in a sort of Catholic subculture. Not a minority in Omaha. I mean, in a sense, like around half of the city seemed to be about the Catholic world, and so that was just the world, for me, in those years. And I mean, there's things like, of course, the priesthood, which is only open to men, and then in the Catholic Church, and the gendering of that particular kind of sacramental leadership and pastoral role, and even altar boys, the sort of ritual assistance of the liturgies. It was a change in my childhood in the 80s when girls could also do that and be on the altar, in this cute kind of white outfit that we would wear and hold the prayer book for the priest. So there was a breaking down of that particular gender role or gender track. I mean, the soccer team at 8 years old or 10 years old could have very easily been mixed as well without any kind of physical real difference. The girls might have been better because they're more developed in some ways as a 10-year-old. But part of that story, Travis, is that my parents divorced when I was 3. I mean, they were around 30, and so my mom, as a Catholic single woman, in the church that doesn't really recognize divorce, had to really kind of scrape for her own sense of agency and dignity and power. She also, didn't have she had finished high school and that was it, and then married my dad and sort of supported him as he finished college. So she was kind of putting back together a track for herself she eventually went to business school and then law school and became a lawyer. So this natural feminism is what I might call it. It was so obvious to me that women were powerful and leaders and intelligent and could make decisions and know a lot of things and be wise. I mean, because that was my experience of parenthood. My dad, had very few of those things in most of his life. So that was, I don't think we can really have a conversation about masculinities without recognizing, first of all, femininities, and second, the sort of patriarchal and misogynist systems that sort of overlay both of these gender roles.
Yeah, I absolutely think it's really important that we recognize all ends of the spectrum and the systems like our patriarchal system that shape the ways that we view men and women, masculinity and femininity, which is better, which is worse, because we do seem to have some level of hierarchy that often what I find in my conversations with men is that most of us integrate that it's better to be masculine, that you don't want to be feminine. That's weakness. That's less than. That's subservient. That's beta. You want to be alpha. You want to be bigger. And so it's an interesting way that we shape boys in this world, and boys and girls and people of all different genders, where there's an assumption that whether it is explicitly said or not, there are some assumptions that are made oftentimes for many of us that it is better to be masculine and to lean more towards appearing like these stories of what a man is. But I love that you and I actually share. I have my parents didn't get divorced. My parents are still together, but I have a pretty strong mother that instilled a pretty strong feminist ideal within myself, in me around. I've always viewed women as often more capable than men and having more skill sets because of what I saw from my mother in her intelligence, in her emotional awareness, in her ability to sort of take the lead in our family at times. I often saw that. And so it's sort of strange to then see that not everybody got that perspective and that there is this sort of more misogynistic culture that we belong to that doesn't value what women have to bring to the table.
Yes. I think in my growing up, sexism would have been the word I would have known and used to recognize this diminishment of girls and women and femininity and feminine powers, like emotional awareness and sensitivity, the ability to strike up connections with other people, would have in some ways, been feminized. And because of being raised by my mother, powerful as she was in the ways I was kind of describing, I saw patriarchy, misogyny, sexism as bad, as problematic, as actually diminishing in the end, both men and women. Mm-hmm. I didn't bear this sort of value or belief that boys or men are better, but rather I bore the belief that the sexist system that holds that is a problem and is an obstacle, is an opponent even. So, because that's what it was for my mother as she sort of made her way as a single mother, as a lawyer, as a professional, as a single parent. So I was, as I'm gay, and yet I fit in naturally and easily to the sort of normative ways of being a boy. I'm athletic. I'm whatever loud. I'm not shrinking. As a personality, and so I didn't have those kinds of challenges that a lot of gay men had in their boyhood. Or, one of my closest friends actually from high school and college is a straight man. I mean, he falls in love only with women and is sexually interested only in women, and yet more effeminate than I am or was, or, that's just how he does him. So I didn't get the kind of flack that a lot of gay boys get from the world. And, I felt queer in other ways, for having a single parent, for being a bookworm, for having a dad who had his own problems. So it felt, strange, queer, weird, not normal in those ways. And I don't want to diminish the burden that difference felt like back then, but I didn't know myself to be a gay kid. I wasn't a gay kid. I was a, kid like every other boy in so many ways.
And was there a point in your life where you did start to recognize that you were a gay boy and that meant something different? Or was that a pretty seamless transition for you?
I would say I was never, I wasn't a boy anymore by that time. Mm. It really wasn't in my childhood. In my, let's say, adolescent years, I was as, befuddled and confused and experimenting and discovering as everybody else about their bodies and others' bodies and, sexual energies. And we all just try to figure it out. Right. And so that's how my boyhood was. By the time I went off to college, I had some interest in exploring, I recognized that I have some sexual interest in other guys, and I wonder what that's about. And I was sort of getting a little distance between me and the taboos that I grew up in, again, where the most natural thing in the world that everyone expected is, of course, you're going to marry a girl and you're going to have kids and you're going to live in that was just what people do. So as I got a little distance from that, I sort of made a secret pledge to explore that side of me that was interested erotically in other guys. But then I went to a Catholic university that in many ways was just as heteronormative as the community in which I had been raised. And so I really almost had created no opportunity for that exploration until I made a further departure to Cairo, Egypt. A world away, a totally different culture. And this is part of why I'm so aware of how culturally situated gender is and sexuality is, because at 22 I moved to the heart of the Arab world. Not that it's this so enlightened place for gays or for sex, but it was different. It was extremely different. It is extremely different. And so in the different ways that gender roles played out there, the different ways that men are men in Egypt and that women are women, I had, in a sense, a greater agency in being myself in different ways. So it was ultimately there that I fell for another American who was a U.S. Marine at the time and met, at my church, who became, in a way, my first boyfriend. And so there was still some working out to do after that in my own sense of identity, but that was at age 24.
I'd love to hear more about your experience in Egypt and sort of finding yourself there and allowing yourself to experiment. I gotta say, it sort of surprises me as a gay person to feel that that's the place where you start to just find yourself and explore who you are as a gay man in this world. That's probably one of the places in the world where I would have assumed, and I might have made an improper assumption, that I wouldn't have felt safe to explore my identity as a gay man there. So I'd love to hear more about your experience.
Sure. Well, part of the draw to Egypt for me personally was that it's part of the Mediterranean region, and Sicily, my ancestral homeland, let's say on my dad's side, is an island in the middle of the Mediterranean. As it played out, a lot of the ways that men are men in Egypt, particularly in Arab society more broadly, were very familiar to me as an Italian American. We touch each other. We kiss each other hello and goodbye. We hug very genuinely, not defendedly or kind of like, a bro chest bumping kind of
where your crotches are as far apart as possible, but you're touched at the shoulders only.
There's also a real emotional aliveness in Egyptian society for men, from tears to tenderness to an aesthetic appreciation for what's beautiful or delicious. Well, this was all very normal and familiar from my family culture, even if, again, it was not the norm of the sort of, white men in my, they were my soccer coaches or whatever. But my uncles, my cousins, my grandfather, my dad. Let me also say, Egypt is a homosocial society. The Arab world is a homosocial society. Men hang out with men, women hang out with women. The cafe is one institution, a male institution where men play backgammon, drink tea, smoke nargila or shisha, and spend hours together every evening. Whereas, in here in New York City where I live, typically you go out with your girlfriend or you have a couple couples go together and spend the evening together. It's not, of course we have male boys night out, but it's the exception, or girls night out. It's the exception. So all of those were just some examples of how different gender plays out in contemporary Egyptian society that, like I say, gave me some space to be in my body, this male body, and with my gender performance in ways that felt like me and to kind of invent myself in Arab society was part of my own unrolling or unfurling of my identity, myself, in all kinds of ways.
I'm so grateful you're sharing this. I think in some ways, especially as Americans, we lose all of the nuance of the Arab world in our cultural conversations, at least at this point in our evolution as a country and in our engagement in the world, that we lose all the nuance of the beauty element of it and the freedom it gave you to find yourself and the fact that you saw yourself in that culture and in those ways of interacting. It felt more at home in you than maybe necessarily sort of like the separatist American culture that you sort of were born into here.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll add even one more bit. Because of some of the things I've mentioned, there is a long tradition of Western men who are gay or who are, sexually not normative, moving to the Arab world, moving to Egypt, Alexandria and Cairo specifically, to live there as expats and to be themselves, be how they are in a society that has, like I said, different expectations of what men can be. Now, again, I'm not trying to say that these are societies where, they're not, this is not a libertine society. I'm not trying to say that. It's not like, oh, of course you can have sex with other men. Of course, whatever, go, follow your yen. No, I'm not trying to say that. But rather, because it's homosocial, because the expectation is, of course, you're hanging out with other men. Of course, you're hugging other men. Of course, you're even, sleeping in the same apartment with other. That's just the expectation. There's a problem if it's some woman that you're not married to. That's really problematic. So there was a whole community of expat gay men that I fell into without even knowing it. They knew, I was just finding myself, but these older men, in a way were my kind of gunkles. They sort of took me under their wing and in a very, I have to say, respectable way, kindly way, mentored me. And they weren't, they didn't even come out necessarily. It was a very, but they saw me and understood something about me that I was just beginning to merely understand about myself. And at some point, quite long into, a year into my time there, I was like, oh, all of these expat men that, I've been, going to cocktail parties with or going to dinner, like, oh, they're all gay. Sort of like a light bulb went off. I was like, oh, okay. Of course, we have, I think, some stereotypes about older gay men as, and really, in a way, I think it's probably ageist about straight older men too. Is like, oh, it's a dirty old man. If there's an older man who's being sexual, he's a dirty old man. Well, whatever the source of those stereotypes, I have to say that these, older men who were some cases 10 years older, sometimes 30 years older than me, they were absolutely, I don't know what the word is, but respectable. It almost sounds like it's downplaying it, but they had boundaries. They were not at all trying to seduce me. They were just being, friends in the company of friends. And finding your way in Egypt as an expat is a challenge. So we all needed, help, and we needed community, and they provided all of that.
So I love that idea that you were there receiving mentorship, that gunkle energy, as you call it, the gay uncle energy, to help guide you on your way. What would you say are some of the major lessons you learned or things you internalized from being in relationship with these men?
That's a good question. And this is more than 20 years ago, so it's not. And I think I appreciate what they gave me in a different way today than I did back then.
Yeah, of course.
And I have to say, my main emphasis, in choosing who to socialize with, I was very, very determined to spend my time with Egyptians. I made exceptions in a way. I was not one of these Americans, and I kind of looked down on them in myself, like these Americans. Like there's a university called the AUC, American University in Cairo. Lots of junior year abroad college students come and they hang out with each other the whole time. And I mean, they make a couple Egyptian friends, but they're basically having an American experience in the middle of Cairo. I was so not interested in that. I was really about connecting with Egyptians of different kinds. But this, because I was teaching English as a foreign language and I was new to that, I had training as a teacher. That was one particular circle of professional educators, people who worked in the English as a foreign language kind of community, who, again, brought me to conferences and invited me to workshops and sort of took me under their wing. And I think in just their way of being, and they weren't necessarily, most of them were not learning Arabic as I was. Like that was a high priority for me. They were just being themselves. They were being American. They were being, gay, middle-aged or older men in the middle of the largest city, in the Arab world. I think one way I could say a lesson is it's okay just to be how you are. As gung-ho as I was on cultural immersion, on learning Arabic, on learning the ways of this then very foreign culture to me, I appreciated that they were okay with not necessarily knowing all of the ins and outs, and not learning the language particularly well, but just being okay with understanding some things and not understanding other things, with acculturating in certain ways and not assimilating in other ways. So again, this sort of spaciousness for how to be myself, how to be myself as a man, how to be myself as an American, as a cultural person, as an educator, as a teacher in a classroom. I just, in a way, was given like permission by their example for kind of, becoming myself, whatever that ended up looking like.
I love that was one of the lessons that you took from it. I think in some ways I see one of the, you use language in the work that you do, and I want to get to that in a bit, but you use language around like queer superpowers. I think of one of the superpowers of the queer community, of people that don't sort of identify in the traditional gender binaries or in normative heterosexual relationships, or just find themselves to be queer and different in other ways. I think it's one of our superpowers is that we have the opportunity to invite others into the space of just being able to be with themselves, be as you are, own the nuances and differences that you are. I think in some ways, the ways that we teach boys to be men kind of blunts the uniqueness, the individual, like the what makes a child really themselves. Yeah. Because they need to be something in order to fit and belong and to be a man in this world. And I think that's why I'm so glad to have someone like you here and to be queer men participating in a conversation like around masculinity, because I think we have the ability to invite men, even if you aren't gay, even if you're not queer, even if you aren't anything other than a cisgender heterosexual man, we get to invite you into more nuances of yourself and into more okayness with just who you are and where you're at in the world.
Yes, I think that permission is one of the gifts that LGBTQ folks have to give to the wider world. Those, expat American and British men that I came to know in my early 20s, they had left their home culture. They had left the societies that had raised them. For a number of reasons, of course, but I make up that escaping certain strictures of what it was to be a man in their home cultures was part of the motivation for becoming an expat and living, sort of semi-permanently in a very different place where, with kind of a middle-class professional income, you could live quite a nice life, but also have distance from social strictures that were operative in that place. Yeah, actually, I think about the another place I lived in the Arab world later in my life, Dubai, which a lot of Arab men, a lot of Egyptians and Lebanese men who wanted to stay living in the Arab world, wanted to be close enough to go home for, mom's birthday or whatever, but were gay. They went to Dubai. And actually, as I think about it, it's not that different from these, expats in Cairo that I met. They were escaping the social strictures of their home society in Lebanon or Syria or Egypt to go to Dubai, this kind of artificial society with 85% expats who live there, so that they could just be themselves, be professionals, be dating men, and not be surveilled by the cousins and cousins of cousins and the sort of extended family or acquaintances that back in their home culture where they came from, they would kind of be enmeshed in.
Yeah, there's such an interesting concept that you're talking about that kind of relates to where one of the lenses I approach my work with clients is to look at the systems that we're involved in, meaning our families, our works, our friendships, the different systems that we're engaged with, and how that reinforces and keeps us stuck in one identity. And what you're pointing to is that many men feel that desire, many people, but many men in this case feel that desire to leave those systems and not have those systems holding you in that identity, to allow you to find your own identity and explore and express in different ways than you might have previously.
Yes. Yeah. And as I, think about the work that I do now, helping people grow and develop as human beings, what I know is that in our journeys, we need to grow into those strictures. We need to grow into our home culture and understand the rules of our home society if we're going to become adults, at all. And then there's a further stages of adult human development that are available to us where we eventually get distance from and leave behind those strictures as the norms, the taboos, the tracks. We recognize freedom and agency and an inventiveness about who we can be. And that individuation or that self-actualization, again, these are not stages of development that everyone comes to. Most people don't, in fact, but they're available to everybody. And so the cultivation of that kind of container and a little bit of heat and stimulus to prompt some movement, along with the perspective taking and the sort of distance taking to sort of look at ourselves and look at the systems in which we are enmeshed inevitably. These are some of the ingredients that make possible further development, even in our adulthood.
I think it's so true that as you were saying, that not everybody or not even most people get to that self-actualization into those higher levels of adult development. What are the pathways that you see that are most helpful or supportive of somebody who is interested in moving towards those higher levels of adult development?
Yeah. Well, if we just stay with the kind of transition that I was maybe mentioning about, like moving out of or beyond the sort of socialized mind that is the place that we grow into as adults, and rather taking on more of the agency of kind of writing our own script, letting our own values, our own personal values, be the North Star of our lives. That, which is by Bob Keegan, one of the researchers in this field of adult development, is called self-authoring. You pick up the pen of your own life and you write your own story rather than let your society, your group, your culture write you, author you. So what allows that? I mean, there's, first of all, just the following our own passions and interests and developing competency, developing, and this is what, in a way, schools are very good at. I mean, this transition that I'm talking about is what American society wants of adults. We want adults to be self-authoring. It's in our corporate values, it's in our education system, it's in our who we elect. It is the kind of culturally dominant type of person. It's what we think of as a leader. So a leader is someone who is self-authoring. They have their own principles. So the harder transition and the rarer one is to move beyond self-authoring, moving beyond this place where, I get to follow my own values, but rather start putting into question how my own worldview is, my own values, and recognize, I actually don't have all the answers either. I've been following my North Star for a long time, my internal voice. Well, I miss plenty of things too. And there's always something to be learned, from others. So I think part of why today I'm so engaged with this work of growing people is precisely because of this cultural experience, this very powerful intercultural experience that I had at a relatively young and very formative time, moving to Cairo when I was 22, because it was crushing in many ways. It was more than I could take in many ways. And I think it was many years of sort of digesting the sort of relativizing, not only of my home culture, but also of my own values. It was like needing to put back together the pieces of myself after this very challenging couple of years living in Cairo at that time. So that's a little bit of a roundabout way to answer, but getting out of our bubbles, getting out of what we take as normal, expected, taken for granted, stepping into another culture and not being on the tour bus, but rather really having conversation with people about their way of looking at the world. This is one kind of stimulus. But then there's the perspective taking, the stepping back and the questioning, and the whole mindfulness movement, I think, is already in this vein. Journaling, writing, about experiences, and really staying with our experiences enough to look at them from multiple perspectives. It takes time. It takes slowing down. It's countercultural to be pausing and questioning in our very fast-paced, very action-oriented, results, outcome-oriented, culture. But those are some of the pathways. I'm very much a community organizer in a sense for leadership development. I mean, the flagship program of Flourishing Gaze is a cohort-based program because of the power of community of practice, the power of seeing in another person when you drop your armor and you get real and vulnerable, seeing yourself in them and letting them see themselves in you. So I think intimate relationships where there is real safety is another privileged place for growth, for learning, for development.
I appreciate you bringing all this stuff up. It feels so true to me that these are such powerful access points. And I agree that I think that it is counterculture to, especially for men, to slow down, to look at other perspectives other than their own, to sit with an experience and see how it made you feel, what it brought up in you, all of those things. We don't teach boys who are becoming men those skills. We don't really value that in men. And so, at least in the US culture. And so I think there are some steps to teaching that. And I love that your program offers like a cohort-based thing where people get to do that in real time. Because you're right, there is something that happens in that intimate space that develops you as a person, that helps you start to learn how to self-author in new ways. So let's hear more about Flourishing Gaze and what you're offering there and what it's all about.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, one thing that comes up in just what we were just talking about is how vibrant the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion is today in America, partly as we wrestle with our own history of systemic racism and as it's coming up with these ongoing slaughterings of Black men, Black boys, often by police. But in the diversity of America in these subcultures, like the little subculture that I, grew up in, the sort of Catholic world of Omaha, in the Italian American community. As we have conversations across these communities, just in this country, there is this possibility of distance, perspective taking, learning, and I think actually, if I can be very hopeful for a few moments, some of the work that we as an American society are doing right now is precisely in relativizing a certain kind of taken for granted set of values that we had been taught to believe for such a long time were enough, were solid, were unquestionable. And these values were written by white men. And so the diversity and inclusion work, which I'm also involved in, that is part of Flourishing Gays. I help organizations, in those journeys of learning that are towards inclusive leadership. I think we as a society are actually beginning to move beyond a simply self-authoring sort of ideal to something further. I mean, this, I think in 10, 20 years ago, the sort of political correctness was a certain earlier version of this, which is now passé. But we're moving and evolving, and I think what you're doing and really imagining and questioning, inquiring into what is the new masculinities, or what are the new masculinities, that is vital. I think healing gender is vital to this emergence, which is possible and is happening. And that's, really some of the deep motivation for my work, which is focused, aside from the corporate stuff, on individuals who are highly accomplished. They've achieved a lot, and maybe they've been quite self-authored for quite some time, and they've risen to quite high places in their professions, whatever they are. They're men, they're gay, bi, queer, or trans, but they've achieved this kind of prefabricated mold for what success is supposed to be. And they're beginning to notice they yearn for more, that's not enough, that they actually have other dreams, other imaginings that are, yes, countercultural, that maybe are kind of just glimmers inside the depth of themselves when they do slow down. And they almost forgot how to chase their dreams. They almost, that dream catcher that, in Native American cultures, like, they kind of put over the bed, that's like a net to kind of hold and catch a few dreams. Well, I think in a way, cultivating queer flourishing, queer leadership, helping gay, bi, queer, and trans men to grow into their own dream man, to be the man of their dreams. I think that's part of the dream catching that we desperately need. And as we maybe were talking about earlier, straight folks need queer folks to be weird and wonderful, so that straight folks can be weird and wonderful too.
It goes back to that permission element you were talking about before, of if you can see someone else being able to do it, then maybe I can do it too.
Yes. We all deserve permission to be ourselves as fully as we can possibly muster.
Yeah. I so appreciate the actual moment of hopefulness that you shared, because we are working through some really intense shadow stuff. We're having really divisive conversations. We're addressing some of the darkness that's been there that we haven't been really willing to address. And you and I are recording this episode as sort of like we're in the liminal space between the verdict of the Derek Chauvin trial with George Floyd's murder. And so I'm so grateful that you brought up that piece of that we are looking at these things, and that the hope is that there is possibility for some new ways of looking at ourselves, at our society, at our culture, at what we are doing to each other, what we're doing to this planet, what we're doing to ourselves. And I appreciate you were talking about in the Flourishing Gays, where you're working with men who have reached a certain level of sort of metric of success that does fall into sort of the current cultural model of success. It's capitalistic, it's leading organizations, it's having vision, creating something oftentimes. And even in those of us who have had to sort of become self-authoring, we can still be playing into the script that we were given to us about what versions of success we need to be reaching for. And what I heard you saying is there often people hit that level of success and there's still a limitation that they feel. They're still not fully formed in that limited metric of success.
Yeah, if they slow down and look at themselves, of course they're going to notice limitations. And there's a lot of cultural and societal pressure to stay just there. Like, oh, you're executive vice president, go for CEO, keep going and be the same person that you're being and just make more money or get a higher position. And this move beyond self-authoring to stages like they're called in some ways redefining or self-transforming. It's actually to throw into question the whole structure that you've become so successful at. So, most people don't go there.
No.
Why would they?
Right.
And let me just say that you brought up shadow material, which we are, I think, in confronting anti-Black racism in particular, and in different ways, anti-Asian racism in this country. By looking at that shadow material that we collectively hold, we are doing some important work on our, let's say, collective psyche. Well, shadow work is also a privileged pathway to the higher reaches of human development. We're talking on the macro scale when we're talking about the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd incident. Part of the shadow work that we might look at as we experience these events that most of us, of course, were not personally present to, is not only to identify with George Floyd as he called for his mama, said he can't breathe, cried with literally a knee on his neck, but also to identify with the law and order authority whose knee is pressing down on that man's neck. We are both Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. If we're going to really see ourselves, we must recognize that we're not just the guileless victim of power, of oppression. We all, whatever our skin color, whatever our sexual orientation, whatever privileges we enjoy in whatever other parts of our life, we are both. And that's part of the countercultural perspective of really changing positions, really holding multiple perspectives, seeing the murderer inside ourselves, seeing that darkness as terrifying as it is to recognize. That's some of the very personal work that makes possible a sort of expansion, a personal expansion, a growing, a learning that goes beyond this sort of culturally approved self-authoring stage that we were talking about.
Wow, that's really powerful the way you shared that, and I really appreciate your perspective on that. I'm just sitting with the power of it because hearing your reflection on that, it does offer a new way of looking at this. There is a reason why our culture is captivated right now on this trial. This isn't the first Black man who's been killed by the police. And yet this one has got our attention. And there's a reason. And it's hard to watch, and it's hard to sit through the discomfort of what's going to happen. It's hard to watch people struggling to see the videotape over and over and over again. And I think what you're offering is where some of the work is for a lot of us, which is to, even the wokest of woke people, is to start looking at where we are in what we watched. Where am I in that? Where am I that police officer? Where am I that person with a knee on my neck? Where am I where have I agreed to this culture? Where am I participating in it? Where am I in that? Because that's how real expansion happens.
Yes.
Beyond, as you were saying, sort of the me-focused self-authoring place that we've allowed ourselves to be in.
Yes. Yeah. So, the Hero's Journey program that I create for these highly accomplished men in the LGBTQ community opens space for them to trade perspectives with one another, for them to dream their dream of who to become next. It offers some stimulus, some provocation, even some encouragement and advocacy for them to grow and stretch. But above all, it's a safe space where they can see one another and practice letting themselves be seen vulnerably, intimately, and offering mutual support with one another. So, I call it Hero's Journey, not hero apostrophe S, but heroes in the plural, because we journey together. Heroes journey together. And this kind of mythopoetic archetype of, going on a journey that ultimately is a transformative one, like, in the Odyssey or in the Aeneid or in the Hobbit, finding out things about yourself you didn't know except from going through the journey, or except from what happened to you when confronted with that particular demon. This is the journey of human expansion that, in a way, we've been passing down wisdom generation to generation from the ages, and with the kind of scientific research into this personal transformation that has been happening in the last decades. No longer is this the realm of the woo-woo or just the poet that can be perhaps dismissed by the Enlightenment mind, the sort of science and engineering mind. But actually, we now understand something about these changes of mindset, changes of consciousness, and very specifically what can make possible this kind of growth.
Yeah, it's so interesting how when we think of the Odyssey, the Iliad, the Hobbit, we focus so much of the time we can get really focused on that one hero and the ultimate task that needs to be accomplished by the end of it. And yet the richness and the majority, like if you just look at the Hobbit, like the richness is the storyline throughout, the fellowship of the ring, the people that are there with him. And the trials and the ups and downs and the relationships and the intimacy and the brotherhood and the sisterhood and that's where the whole story is. It's not at the end where it's just not at the end of the story.
Yes.
And so it's so interesting. I love this that you call it the heroes without the apostrophe, that we're doing this together, because I think that's such an important thing for men of all different types to experience, is that intimacy and seeing each other and being seen by each other. I think there's such a lack of that in our culture. You were talking about the Arab world where men spend so much time with each other, talking and socializing. How rarely do most of us men get to have that? Do we get to be seen beyond? I think for those of us that do have romantic and sexual relationships with other men, we do get some pockets of that here and there, but how rarely do we actually get to really see and be seen by a group of men and feel safe in doing that?
Yes. Yeah. And, yes, gay men who have, let's say lots and lots of other friends who are gay men. I mean, there's some gay men who all of their friends are straight women, but for gay men who really are having a homosocial life, and here in Manhattan, you can hear the sirens. Like there are plenty of opportunities for that. But what I have come to know through my work with Flourishing Gays, is that even in gay male culture, although there's plenty of sexual permission to be sexually intimate with other men, and even ones that you're just meeting or hardly know, and to be vulnerable physically in those ways, gay men have as many challenges finding non-sexual intimacy and emotional vulnerability with one another as straight men. As I've opened up spaces for gay men, queer men to connect with one another deeply and non-sexually, I just keep hearing again and again from, my participants, how rare it is. And by the way, no alcohol involved either.
That's a game changer, because what gay space is there without alcohol?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, we're all desperate for intimacy. We're all desperate to be seen, and we all need it. Like we need, like a flower needs water and sun. There's a certain starvation, I think, that is happening, and that, yeah, it's incumbent on all of us to connect deeply for our own good and for the good of the greater world.
Starvation is the perfect word that I notice in my work with men too. Is there is a starvation regardless of how you identify as a man. There is a starvation for that intimacy and for that kind of connection, and very rarely do most of us feel safe to be in that space. Yeah. And I think it's time to start questioning what that's about, and to start really looking at why don't we feel safe with each other? Yes. Why don't, when you ask women in the world, why don't they feel safe in a room full of men? Why don't queer people feel safe? Why don't men of color feel safe? Like, why is it that we all have this shared experience of not really feeling safe with each other and yet are craving and starving for that connection and intimacy?
Yes.
I'm really curious, is there anything else that feels important to you to share about the work you're doing in the world, either through Flourishing Gays or any of your other work?
Well, I've begun to create a Flourishing Gays space that is open to all. It's called The Flourish, and it happens around once a month. And it's just an hour. It's built on the conviction that queer flourishing benefits everyone. And while we, focus on some aspect of, the learning that I've been doing in paying attention to queer development, through some, questions and, a little bit of reflection, everybody coming, men, women, everyone in between, straight allies, and professionals like professional development managers, human resource managers, coaches, therapists, who professionally support flourishing. Everyone shows up to the degree they want to, looking at themselves and wondering what can be learned from paying attention to queer flourishing, what can be gained. So on my website, flourishinggays.com, there's a link always for The Flourish, and you can kind of see when the next one is and register there. And I'm really eager to welcome anyone who's interested in any of the themes that you've been talking about, on new masculinities, or what our conversation has covered today. Would really welcome folks stepping into that flourishing space.
Queer flourishing benefits everyone. I think that's such a new perspective that I don't know that many people have really given themselves a chance to sit with. Are there any quick sort of nuggets that you can come up with for why you believe, or why you operate under that hypothesis that queer flourishing benefits everyone?
Well, in some ways, I think American society already knows this, right? American society loves its drag queens. Uh-huh. It's strange, folks who are gender bending. We delight in the weirdness. In other ways, I mentioned in passing how many straight women and gay men have real lovely, safe friendships, right? Thank God for the gay men who can be, and the straight women who can be friends. I mean, thank God that they can find in each other a kind of compatibility and that is not fraught by gender politics in the same ways that other kinds of friendships can be. So I think we know this already, and by the way, American society is not unique in appreciating gays or queer culture, but I don't think we make it explicit, and I think that's some of the newness of what I'm doing at the intersection of LGBTQ lived experience and leadership development. Putting a stake in the ground and saying, yeah, not just for us gays do we need to grow into leaders, but you straight folks, you benefit from our becoming ourselves and all of our faggotry and all of our butchness and all of our gender nonconforming, all of the weird kind of wonderful panoply of ways that LGBTQ folks show up for themselves when they get permission from inside or from each other, or just violate and transgress the rules to be themselves wildly, vitally, flamboyantly. It gives, this theme that you and I, Travis, have been talking about. It gives all of us permission to be human more fully.
Well, thank you for putting your stake in the ground so firmly, because in hearing you say that last bit, for me, it reinvigorates the permission I get to give myself of being a gay man that's holding space for a conversation around masculinity and manhood. In so many ways, I do think I have a perspective that's worth offering. I do believe that's why I bring on a lot of queer men onto this podcast, is because I do believe that we haven't had a voice at the table around this conversation in a mainstream kind of way. And I do think we have a perspective and permission to give for people to find more of themselves as whole beings rather than this pinched off version they've designed of themselves. And so I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate the work you're doing, because I completely agree with you, I guess is what I mean, is it does benefit everyone and help really creating safe spaces for gay men, trans men, bi men, queer men to flourish, I think really does do a benefit to our culture, for sure.
Yes. Thank you.
So if you were going to leave the listeners with one piece of advice, whether they're gay, bi, queer, trans, heterosexual, cisgender, whatever, however they identify, what is that piece of advice you would leave them with?
I'd say get curious about the rules that you've been living by and restricted yourself to for so long. Get curious about the armor that you wear to protect yourself from expanding. And tell on yourself. Start noting it to yourself, to others. Write it down, write about it. Tell on yourself when you see your guardedness and your rule following, so that you can begin to have some greater permission.
Ooh, tell on yourself. That I love how risky that can feel to a lot of people, especially I think for men. We're supposed to show strength and invulnerability, and telling on yourself requires a level of vulnerability. So I love that invitation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If people want to find out more about you, Flourishing Gays, the work you're doing in the world, how might they be able to find that?
Well, besides flourishinggays.com, which is the website, on Instagram, it's also Flourishing Gays. The same on Facebook, Flourishing Gays, the same on LinkedIn. So again, I really welcome folks to come to The Flourish. Open up yourself to some queer flourishing. Who knows what will happen?
Who knows what will happen? I hope that people have really stayed tuned to our conversation, because I do think just in two queer men showing up and having this conversation, I think there are a lot of things that people can gain. And I so appreciate the work you're doing in the world to create more safe spaces for queer people to flourish and to continue drawing the connection to how that benefits everyone. Because that is how we create change. That's how we expand. That's how we move from that me-centered self-authoring into those next iterations of ourselves and those next expanded developmental stages. So thank you so much for the work you're doing in the world.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you for what you're doing. I'm really glad to be part of it.
If people want to get in contact with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Travers03, or you can email me directly at travisstock03@gmail.com. If you're interested in supporting the work of the New Masculine, I'm also on Patreon. That's patreon.com/thenewmasculine. If you want to become a contributor, help me continue the mission of this podcast, please feel free to go there and become a contributor. It's been a pleasure to have you, Dominic. I really appreciate all that you've brought. And until our next episode, thanks everyone.